70 Christians have been found beheaded. Yes, beheaded in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why is no one reporting this? Why does no one seem to care? Well, let me bring in Dexter Van Zyl, an expert on anti-Christian violence. Dexter, what can you tell us about this absolutely barbaric atrocity?
Okay, well, first of all, it took place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a huge country with about 105 million people, that right now is basically in a conflict with neighboring Rwanda over territory in Kivu. Okay? And the violence was perpetrated by an organization that was that is affiliated with ISIS. And the thing is that there are some people who have argued that they are essentially working on behalf of Rwanda because Rwanda is a neighboring country that covets and is actually taking control of an awful lot of the mineral resources in Kivu. And so, what this violence has done is demonstrated that the Congo cannot protect its citizens from violence in Kivu or in North Kivu. And so, what people are worried about is that this is essentially an attempt to kind of destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo and legitimize Rwandan claims to the minerals in the region. And I don't want to underestimate or downplay the ideological hatred by the perpetrators of this group who murdered these Christians. But the thing is that it's taking place against a backdrop of geopolitics in Africa. And what has happened is, and so if the Congo, under the leadership of Felix Tshisekedi, can't protect its borders, essentially it's going to have to go for help outside the country, and the people live there, and that's why people are worried about it. The Congolese that I've spoken to here in the States say, I said, wait a minute, are you telling me that the Rwandans are supporting this attack? And they said, yes. And I said, but Rwanda is a Christian nation. And they said, yes, but this will help destabilize the region where all of these minerals that are used for the iPhones that we make, that we use in our lives. And so clearly there's an ideological and a theological component going on, but there's also a strategic issue as well.
Oh,
it's terrible, isn't it? It's hard. As a former Peace Corps volunteer, I served in the Congo for about a year, 14 months in the 1980s. And the problem is that if this violence is allowed to continue and the average Congolese learns and recognizes, and the violence like this against Christians perpetrated by jihadists is not a new problem. It's been a problem in North Africa for a long time. And the problem is that trying to get people to pay attention to it is very difficult.
Well, that's my second question is, you see the headline, 70 Christians beheaded, and you think, what? You almost can't fathom that headline. But is Islamic violence against Christians in Africa, is this an anomaly, basically?
Oh, no, absolutely not. This takes place in a number of countries throughout the region. And there are some people who are worried that essentially what we're looking at is a jihad against Christians in numerous other places in North Africa. And routinely we hear reports of these acts of violence. And the problem is that what happens when the Christians start to fight back? Are we going to start to see the equivalent of an interreligious war in the continent? And the problem is that there's going to be huge problems with this. The problem is that, first of all, the reason why this doesn't get as much traction as, say, the conflict, the Palestinian suffering in Gaza, is because there's just not that many reporters on the ground. And the Congo is a huge, dangerous place to be a reporter. And frankly, also, there's just a fair amount of ideological indifference to anti-Christian violence on the part of reporters in the West.
And Dexter, I think that's the question. If you were to replace 70 Congolese Christian with any other minority group, 70 Palestinians were beheaded, 70 people at a pride parade were beheaded, this would be the biggest news story of the decade. And yet this just happened and no one's reporting on it. And literally crickets.
Right. And it's like that with Boko Haram when they murder people in Nigeria. There's basically crickets. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have essentially kind of an anti Christian bias on the part of people who run the media. And the thing is that I think there's another factor is that essentially Christianity has been lumped in with essentially this whole notion of settler colonialism, and that whatever violence is directed their way is largely a consequence of the violence perpetrated by Christians in years past. But I'm going to tell you, I lived in Zaire. I lived in the DRC when it was called Zaire, and one of the reasons why I became a much more devout Christian was because of the church that I went to every Sunday morning as a volunteer. Okay, and I would go and talk to the local pastor when I had like spiritual crises as a volunteer. And the thing is that so what has happened is that Black African Christians, okay, have suffered the consequences of hostility towards Western civilization and Christianity itself, in part because people don't care what happens to Christians unless it can be blamed. And part of it has to do with the fact that if the perpetrators are dark skinned, well, then we're going to have to give them a pass. And it's a very, very strange milieu, so to speak, that we work in. But the thing is that unfortunately, this is the cynical side of me. I've been somebody that has documented hostility towards Israel for the past 20 years. But if the IDF were responsible for these beheadings, it would have made the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times and every newspaper throughout the world. And there would be, Israeli Jews condemning it as well. But the problem is that because it's essentially black on black violence, nobody cares. And there was a book called Stealth Conflicts by a scholar by the name of Virgil Hawkins, and he's a tremendous scholar. And he documented the number of newspaper articles about the civil war in the Congo. And this was at a point of time when 5.4 million people have died. There were a few dozen newspaper articles or a few dozen news shows or segments on it. But then when you looked at the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which every one of the deaths is tragic, we're talking at this time maybe over a time frame of maybe 30 to 40,000 people had died. There were literally thousands of articles. Mm. So there were more articles than there were people killed during a specific period of time. And it had to do with, first of all, it was in people's interest that this conflict be covered. And more importantly, it was just easier to go to cover. Mm-hmm. The violence in the Congo is a huge country. It's kind of desolate. If you go there, there's a very good chance you're going to get very sick and you may not get good medical care. Mm-hmm. That was something that I experienced as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah.
Go to Israel, you can have a nice meal at a restaurant in Jerusalem the evening after you've basically covered a protest at the security barrier.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's selective outrage, and there's this line when people talk in the about Israel in the news, and you hear it a lot, which is this: if there's no Jews, there's no news. Right across the border in Syria, some people have estimates of close to 1 million Syrians died. And I think your point is very insightful and very spot on. Let's all be praying for these incredible African Christians that are standing up to just unimaginable barbarity. Let's be praying for the church in the DRC. Dexter Van Zyl, thank you so much for your insight and obviously your life experience. It's been very, very helpful. Dexter, thank you so much, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Raj.